Let us begin by silencing the lies, the comforting catechized falsehoods whispered by the ecclesiarchy to a quadrillion souls are meaningless here. They speak of the Emperor's guiding light, a gentle hand that leads humanity through the darkness. They are children telling stories of a benevolent father to ward off the shadows under their beds. They are fools. The Astronomican is not a light. It is a scream. It is an act of perpetual galaxy-spanning violence. Imagine a forest infinite and black stretching across all of creation. The trees are not wood, but the solidified malice of forgotten aeons. The ground is not soil, but the compressed despair of trillions of dead souls. This is the immaterium, the warp. It is not a void. It is a plenum, a churning hyperdimensional ocean of raw emotion, unbound psychosis, and predatory nascent consciousness. It is the hell that mankind's own collective soul has birthed and continues to feed. In this forest, predators of impossible geometry and limitless hunger wait. They are the demons. They are the ruinous powers. They are the shadow that longs to devour all light. The Astronomican is the only fire in this endless dark. It is not a gentle guiding beacon. It is a roaring, shrieking psychic bonfire, an explosion of pure, agonized will. It does not offer warmth. It offers only definition. It is a singular, terrible here in the everywhere of that infinite madness. It is a sound so loud in the Empyrean, the combined, amplified shriek of thousands of souls burning at once, that it drowns out just barely the constant seductive whispers of the gods. This fire does not illuminate the path. It burns the path. It cauterizes a tunnel through the raw chaos, a corridor of relative stability. It is this tunnel, this safe passage, that the ships of the Imperium use. It is the only thing that keeps the monsters at bay. It is the only thing that allows mankind to pretend it still has an empire. Without this fire, the forest floods in. The beasts emerge. The dark, at long last, devours all. And what is the source of this miracle? What machine, what god could generate such power? The answer is a monument to horror, a grotesque parody of life. The mechanism of the Astronomican is not forged from blessed steel, but from suffering. Its heart, its engine, its primary fuel source is the master of mankind. The Emperor. Look upon him if you dare. Cast aside the stained glass icons and the golden statues. Look upon the reality. He is not a golden god resplendent on a throne. He is a desiccated corpse. He is a skeletal thing withered and broken, bound by 1,000,000 arcane cables and nutrient pipes to the gargantuan failing artifice of the golden throne. His body is dust, his bones brittle, his flesh long since sloughed away. But his mind endures. It is a psychic furnace of impossible, unimaginable power, a star of pure consciousness held in a state of perpetual agonizing existence by a technology no one understands. He is trapped. He is the fuel. His will stretched impossibly thin across 10,000 years, his psychic might focused by the arcane machinery of the throne, is the raw, unrefined energy of the Astronomican. He does not rule. He does not guide. He burns. He screams into the void a silent psychic scream of undiluted power and unending pain. And that scream is the only light. But even a god's scream must be focused. Raw power is useless. It must be amplified, aimed, and stabilized. This task falls to the great choir. Deep within the hollow mountain, in the most secure vault of the Sanctum Imperialis, they sit. 10,000 of the most powerful individual psychers culled from 1,000,000,000 worlds. They are not priests. They are not honored acolytes. They are psychic batteries meticulously selected. They are human wicks arranged in a vast, agonizing psychic circuit. Their minds, their very souls are forcibly opened to the full, unfiltered, terrifying power of the Emperor's consciousness. They are the lens. They take the raw, chaotic sun of his mind and focus it, shape it. stabilize it into the precise, cohesive beam that cuts through the tempest of the warp. And in this service, they are utterly consumed. Their souls are not gently used, they are immolated. They are vaporized. They burn out one by one, their minds reduced to superheated ash, their bodies slumping lifeless in their gilded, wired chairs. They are the daily horrific cost of the light. The fire is hungry. The wicks burn very, very fast. The demand of the Astronomican is absolute, relentless, and unforgiving. This is the great, grinding, horrific bureaucracy at the heart of the Imperium's survival. This is the true hidden face of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica. From every corner of the sprawling galaxy, the great black ships glide through the warp, their holds chilled and psychically dampened. They are not filled with gold or grain or weapons. They are filled with living souls. They are the psychic tithe. On every imperial world, billions are tested. Millions are found wanting. Thousands are chosen. They are harvested from their homes, torn from their families, chained, collared, and brought to the dark holds of these silent ships. They are the unwanted, the dangerous, the mutants, the witches. They are the raw material of survival. An endless shuffling procession of dread arrives at Terra. 1,000 psychers every single day. 1,000 living, feeling, thinking human beings, many of them just children, are marched into the echoing chambers of the great choir. They are led by silent tech priests past the smoking, charred husks of those who came before them, past the desiccated bodies being unceremoniously dragged from their thrones. They are plugged into they are strapped down, and then the connection is established. They feel the agonizing, all-consuming touch of the Emperor's mind, a force so great, so vast, it vaporizes their consciousness in less than a picosecond. For one brief, terrible moment, their soul flares bright, a tiny, screaming spark, adding its infinitesimal fuel to the inferno. And then it is gone, annihilated, wiped from existence. This is not glorious sacrifice. It is consumption. It is the industrial-scale rendering of human souls to keep the light, burning for just one more day. The entire Imperium, with its million worlds and its endless armies, is a vast, unthinking machine designed for one purpose: to feed this one single dying fire. It is a system built on the daily ritualized murder of 1,000 of its own children, and who uses this terrible light, who dares ride the storm that it tames, the navigators, the high-born mutants of the ancient Navis Nobilitae. They are the only beings in the galaxy capable of steering a vessel through the living nightmare of the immaterium. Upon their foreheads, hidden behind veils, and beneath towering helms, they bear the third eye, the warp eye. With it they look directly into the chaos. What do they see? They see madness made manifest. They see oceans of screaming faces, continents of frozen pain, skies of boiling, iridescent rage. It is a realm without logic, without time, without direction, without stability. It is the realm of the predator gods. They do not see the Astronomican as a ship's captain sees a lighthouse on a distant shore. It is not a visual phenomenon. They feel it. They hear it. It is a psychic pressure, a constant unwavering sound, a fixed point of immense, centralized agony in the otherwise formless, swirling storm. It is their psychic North Star, their compass, their anchor. It is the only constant in an equation of infinite malevolent variables. By focusing their entire will on that unwavering shriek, they can perceive the subtle, treacherous currents of the warp. They can sense the storms, the whirlpools, the sudden demonic tides. They can plot a course. They can find a moment of relative calm in the howling gale. They can guide a ship its Geller field straining against the impossible pressure from one system to the next, without its fragile reality shield failing, without the demonic entities of the void tearing the hull apart and claiming the souls of all within. Without that single agonizing point of reference, they are just as blind as any other human. To enter the warp without the Astronomican's guidance is not a gamble. It is not a risk. It is a statistical certainty of annihilation. It is a deliberate final act of suicide for every soul aboard every ship that tries. This is the Imperium of Man, a galactic empire of 1,000,000 worlds, a quadrillion souls, an uncountable number of armies, all resting entirely on the tortured, dying mind of one desiccated corpse and the daily industrial slaughter of 1,000 others. It is an engine of suffering powered by suffering to achieve only more suffering, and it is all breaking. This is the terrible final secret whispered only in the darkest chambers of the Imperial Palace, a truth so profound it would shatter the Imperium overnight. The light is failing. The Astronomican is not stable. It flickers. It gutters. In recent centuries, entire sectors have been plunged into darkness for weeks, months, before the light uneasily returns. The Golden Throne, that masterpiece of forgotten alien science, is dying. Its intricate, irreplaceable systems are failing one by one, and no one alive knows how to repair them. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the supposed masters of technology, pound on its ancient golden shell, chanting meaningless litanies of maintenance, but they are savages. They are primitive children worshipping a complex machine they cannot possibly comprehend. And the Emperor, he is fading. After 10,000 years of incomprehensible, unimaginable suffering, his divine will is guttering. The strain is too much even for the master of mankind. The sacrifices must be increased. Once it was 500 psychers a day, then 800, now 1,000. Soon it will be 2,000, then 5. But it is not enough. The light grows dimmer, more erratic. The safe passages of the warp, codified by centuries of travel, become treacherous and unpredictable. The storms grow more frequent, more violent. The priests demand more faith, the generals demand more ships, the governors demand more tithes, but the machine at the heart of it all is grinding to a halt. The Imperium is a body riddled with terminal cancer, kept alive only by a failing heart monitor that is running on a dying battery. The High Lords of Terror, the golden armored custodians, the greatest minds of the Mechanicus, they all know the truth. They do not ask if the light will fail. They only ask when, and they pray to a God who cannot hear them, a God who is too busy screaming that the end does not come in their lifetime. They are fools. The end is already here. It is waiting, and the darkness is very, very patient. It was not a fade. It was not a flicker, nor a guttering gasp as a dying candle might make. It was a cessation, a full, instantaneous, and absolute stop, as if a switch had been thrown on the very laws of reality. In the vast chorus sanctum of the hollow mountain, 10,000 souls were simultaneously extinguished. They had been trained for agony, conditioned for the psychic immolation of their service. They were prepared to be burned by the Emperor's light. They were not in any way prepared for the cold. The torrent of raw, divine power they were channeling, a force greater than 1,000 suns, simply was not there. In its place, a vacuum, an absolute psychic zero. This void, this sudden and impossible absence of the Emperor's mind, was more violent than any fire. It did not burn them, it shattered them. The result was not quiet. The psychic backlash, the sudden colossal pressure change in their souls, had horrific physical manifestations. The nearest 1,000 psychers, those at the very focus of the beam, simply petrified. They froze solid in their golden thrones, flesh and bone, turning to a brittle opalescent crystal in less than a microsecond, a silent, screaming monument of 1,000 statues. The next ring, subjected to the snap rebound of raw immaterium, rushing in to fill the void, exploded. Their bodies, no longer shielded by the Emperor's power, were detonated by the unmediated touch of the warp. Blood, bone, and cerebral fluid painted the vast chamber walls in a grotesque, instantaneous mural. The rest, the lucky ones, simply slumped. Their minds were wiped clean. Their souls annihilated, their bodies reduced to empty, silent husks. The deafening psychic roar of the Astronomican was replaced by the wet, percussive sounds of mass death, and then, for the first time in 10 millennia, a terrible, profound silence, deeper, holier, beyond the reach of any mortal man. The Adeptus Custodes felt it. They, the Golden 10,000, had stood vigil for an eternity. Their very being was attuned to the resonance of their master. It was their compass, their solace, their proof of purpose. To them, the Emperor's psychic presence was not a distant light. It was the very air they breathed. And then the air was stolen from their lungs. It was a physical blow. Captain General Trajan Valoris, standing his centuries-long watch before the great portal, staggered his auramite armor, groaning as if struck. He gripped his guardian spear not against an enemy, but against the sudden crushing gravity of absence. He looked towards the golden throne, and for the first time in his augmented life he felt nothing. No power, no pain, no struggle, no great defiant will holding back the dark. Only silence. A cold, empty, terrifying silence that was the very definition of failure. Then came the sound. The only sound in that vast chamber. The golden throne, that arcane, incomprehensible engine of survival, had groaned under the strain for 10,000 years. Its deep, resonant hum was the heartbeat of the Imperium. Now that heartbeat faltered. The rhythmic, powerful pulse of its machinery stuttered. The lights on the 1,000 arcane consoles, which had not changed in memory, flickered one by one. A new sound emerged, a high-pitched, agonizing whine. It was the wail of ancient, irreplaceable systems, failing of containment fields, collapsing of a machine finally dying. It screamed for 30 seconds, an eternity of mechanical grief, and then it stopped. The lights went out. The hum ceased. The golden throne was dark. The Emperor of mankind, the anathema, the master, was no longer dying. He was dead. In the high spires of the Senatorum Imperialis, the High Lords of Terror were debating the logistics of the Segmentum Pacificus crusade when the screaming began. It did not come from the Vox casters. It came from down the hall from the astropathic chamber of the Tower of Hegemon. It was not the structured telepathic cant of normal communication. It was a raw, primal shriek of utter psychic terror. The astropaths, their minds permanently anchored to the distant light of the Astronomican, suddenly found their anchor severed. They were adrift in the full howling madness of the warp, with no guide, no North Star, no terror. They clawed at their sightless eyes, their mouths open in a rictus of terror, their minds shattered by the sudden absolute blindness. It's gone. The light is gone. We are blind. We are lost. He is gone. The message, the last coherent one they would ever send, rippled through the minds of every attendant in the palace. The chamber of the High Lords erupted. Heresy roared the ecclesiarch, his face purple. This is a test. Silence them. The Lord Commander Militant was already shouting orders into his vox. Lock down the palace, deploy all orbital assets. Find the source of this lie. But the Fabricator General of Mars said nothing. His augmetic eyes whirred, and a single synthesized word of pure panic escaped his vocoder negative. The signal from the sanctum is null. All data is zero. Panic, cold and complete, seized the masters of the Imperium. They were the captains of a ship that had just lost its engine, its map, and its star, all in the same terrible instant. Denial was a shield of paper against a tidal wave of reality. Terror, the center of all things, was now just a rock, blind and screaming in the dark. Millions of light years from the throne world, aboard the lunar-class cruiser Indomitable Vow, Lord Captain Hesperus was dictating a minor course correction. The bridge was a cavern of cool, green-lit data slates and incense-choked air. Warp transit has been stable for 93 standard days, he droned to his log. We anticipate landfall at Armageddon in 12. His words were cut off by a sound that did not belong. a low, wet gurgle followed by a sharp, piercing shriek of pure, undiluted agony. Every head on the bridge snapped towards the high, shrouded alcove of the navigator. Hieronymus Vane, scion of House Ptolemy, had been staring into the Empyrean for his entire adult life. He was a master of the currents, a reader of the Emperor's divine storm. He had seen the screaming faces in the tide, the great leviathans of rage that swam in the deep, and the endless, beautiful, terrible light of the Astronomican that cut through it all. Now he opened his warp eye, his mutated third eye, to take his hourly reading, and saw nothing. It was not darkness. Darkness is a presence. It was not a void. A void is an emptiness. This was a negation, an absolute philosophical unbeing. The very concept of direction, of here and there, of terror ward and void ward had ceased to exist. The anchor of his mind, the great screaming psychic pylon that defined all reality within the warp, was gone. He was in a single, terrifying instant, utterly and profoundly lost in an infinite, formless, malevolent ocean. The shock was a physical force. It slammed back through his pineal eye, a psychic recoil of pure, cold nothing. "No," he whispered, his voice a strained, breathless thing. "No, no, it cannot be. I am blind. I am blind." He clawed at the heavy velvet veil covering his face, his body convulsing. The crew watched in horror as thick, dark blood, black in the green light of the bridge, began to pour from under the veil, streaming down his chest. Hieronymus Vane screamed a sound of such complete and final despair that it would haunt the crew for the few minutes of life they had left. He was the first to know the truth. They were no longer traveling. They were just adrift. This one personal tragedy was a microcosm repeated 10,000-fold across the galaxy. But for most, the end was not a slow realization. It was an immediate, violent consumption. On the transport ship Saint's Mercy, 50,000 colonists, guardsmen, and priests were slumbering in cryostasis, dreaming of a new life on a promised agri-world. Their Geller field, generated by an aging, overworked cogitator, was already strained, a flickering bubble of reality in the non-reality of the warp. It had been sustained, as all fields were, by the faint residual blessing of the Emperor's light, a psychic interference that kept the very worst of the predators at bay. When the Astronomican winked out, that protection evaporated. The psychic pressure of the immaterium, no longer held back by the great dam of the Emperor's will, slammed into the Saint's Mercy with the force of a supernova. The Geller field did not just fail. It shattered like spun glass. For the crew on the bridge, the universe inverted. The cold steel walls of their ship dissolved into screaming liquid flesh. The stars outside the view portal became a swirling constellation of laughing, leering eyes. The ship's navigator, not a true navigator, but a low-level psyker, exploded as a being of pure pink fire forced itself into his body. In the cryobays, the ice on the pods melted not from heat, but from a sudden invasive change in physical law. The 50,000 sleepers awoke not to the chiming bells of their new home, but to the sound of their own ship screaming. The metal bulkheads buckled bleeding, noxious, multicolored fluids. Demons, the small, giggling foot soldiers of the gods, boiled out of the air vents, out of the data ports, out of the reflections in the polished steel. They fell upon the confused, groggy colonists with a joy that was chilling. The Saint's Mercy did not get lost. It was ripped apart, its components used to build a monument of agony, and its 50,000 souls were dragged screaming into a hell they had been taught did not exist. And then the silence. Across the million worlds of the Imperium, in every astropathic choir on every civilized planet, the attempts began. The astropaths, their minds reeling from the psychic shock, tried to do their duty. They tried to send the word. They tried to shout. On the vital relay world of Cypra Mundi, the sector capital Lord Astropath Primaris Grell attempted to cast a message to the neighboring Segmentum Solar. He gathered the psychic might of his entire choir, 500 souls, and pushed. He aimed their collective, focused thought at the one place it had always gone terror. It was like trying to throw a stone at a star that was no longer there. The message laden with terror and confusion did not travel. It hit the empty, silent void where the Astronomican signal should have been, and it simply stopped. It vanished. It was absorbed by the sudden, overwhelming silence. There was no terror to receive it. There was no psychic stream to carry it. The river of communication that had bound the Imperium together for 10 millennia had run dry. Grell collapsed, blood pouring from his nose, and ears the minds of his choir shattered by the psychic rebound. They had shouted into an abyss, and the abyss in its vast, cold indifference had broken them. From Macraga to Cadia, from Fenris to Baal, the same scene was repeated. Astropaths screamed into a void that gave no echo. Voxmasters frantically sent signals that would take 10,000 years to reach their destination. The great pulsing, living network of the Imperium had its spinal cord severed. Every planet, every sector, every fleet, every army was suddenly terribly and completely alone. The galaxy had become a deaf mute and blind immensity, and humanity was scattered within it, a trillion orphans in an endless darkening night. In the scriptorium, Primus High in the fortress of Hera, Roberta Gilliman was reviewing logistical reports for a war that no longer mattered. Data slates filled with shipping manifests and munitions requests for the Indomitus Crusade covered his vast strategium table. He did not need sleep. He only needed duty. He felt it not as the navigators or astropaths had. They had felt a blindness, a sudden howling void. For Gilliman it was a severance. His entire life, even in the darkness of the heretic Astartes, he had felt the background resonance of his father. It was a constant, a fundamental law of the universe, like gravity or time. Since his resurrection, that presence had been amplified, 1,000-fold, a constant roaring chorus of unimaginable, unending pain. It was the agony of a god on a rack, and it had been Gilliman's constant companion for a century. It was a dreadful, terrible sound, but it was the sound of his father fighting. Now, in a single, unmeasurable instant, the pain stopped. The presence vanished. The connection was cut. Gilliman's hand encased in the blue-gold plate of the Ultima Gauntlet froze over a data slate. A profound, impossible cold radiated through his being, a spiritual chill that no armor could defy. It was a cold he had not felt since he had knelt before the wounded, dying form of the Emperor on the vengeful spirit 10 millennia ago. But this was different. That had been a wound, a terrible, mortal blow. This was an ending. This was the cold of a star that has not just dimmed, but has been utterly extinguished. The Primarch stood his chair, scraping loudly in the cavernous, silent chamber. The reports, the crusade, the Imperium, all of it was suddenly meaningless dust. He knew. He did not need a screaming astropath or a blinded navigator to confirm it. He knew in his very soul, in the new hollow space where his father's presence used to be. "Father," he whispered. The word was not a prayer. It was a eulogy. For a full 10 seconds, Robert Gilliman, the avenging son, the last hope of the Imperium, allowed himself to feel the crushing, absolute weight of his grief. He was an orphan. They were all orphans. Then the Primarch's logic, cold and absolute, reasserted control. The grief was not dismissed, but it was caged, locked behind the iron will that had built an empire of 500 worlds. If the Imperium was dead, Ultramar would not be. He strode to the central command lectern. His voice when he spoke was not that of a grieving son. It was the iron-hard command of the Lord of Ultramar. "This is Gilliman. Vox link to all Tetrarchs, all Fleet Masters, all Chapter Masters within the 500 worlds. Code Primarch, Eterna Noctis." The command network of Ultramar, the most efficient in the galaxy, flared to life. All Crusade fleets assigned to the Indomitus task forces are to cease offensive operations immediately. Disengage from all contacts. All fleets of the Ultramar Defense Force are to return to the 500 worlds by shortest possible warp translation. Blind jump if you must. I repeat, all fleets return. We are executing the Kingulum defensive. Seal the borders of Ultramar. No one gets in. No one gets out. Acknowledge. From Calthaeax and Prandium, the acknowledgements came tinged with confusion, but absolute in their obedience. The Tetrarchs, his governors, knew that such an order was not a strategic retreat. It was the sounding of a death knell. Guilliman was building a wall against the night, and he was sealing himself and his people inside it. On the streets of Macrag's polis, the civilians knew nothing. The marble plazas were clean, the citizens dutifully moving to their morning labors, the sky a perfect clear blue. But the foundation of their perfect world had just been pulverized. The first sign was the silence. The great vox criers on every plaza which piped in the daily voice of terror, broadcast of inspiration, and news were silent. After an hour of dead air, they crackled to life, not with the voice of terror, but with the stirring martial anthems of Ultramar. The second sign was the Astartes. The ceremonial guards at the great shrines were replaced. Then they were reinforced. Full tactical squads of the 4th Company, their battle plate a grim practical blue, marched into the plazas. They took up positions on every street corner by the gates of the great granaries and at the entrances to the spaceport. Their bolters were mag-locked to their thighs, but their hands never strayed far from the grips. At the civilian port, the great lumbering transports that brought agri-goods from Eax and minerals from the outer systems simply stopped arriving. The landing fields, usually a hive of activity, fell silent. A portly merchant gilder, his face red with indignation, argued with a pale-faced administratum official. My tithe-grade grain transport is 4 hours overdue. It is never late. What is the meaning of this? The official, his hands visibly shaking, stamped the man's data slate with a red rune of delayed indefinitely. By order of the Lord Primarch, the port is closed. All stellar traffic is suspended. Suspended for what, Xenos? The official leaned closer, his voice a terrified whisper. Worse, the astropaths. They are all screaming, or they are silent. We are cut off. The panic contained for now began to spread. It was not a riot. Not yet. It was a feeling. A nervous energy in the crowd. A tightening of the air. The people of Ultramar did not yet know that their god was dead, but they knew that they were, for the first time in their lives, profoundly alone. And the Ultramarines, in their silent, watchful vigilance, were not there to fight a Xenos invasion. They were there to keep the most orderly civilized society in the galaxy from tearing itself to pieces when the truth finally dawned. Within the Eye of Terror reality was a subjective term. On the bridge of the vengeful spirit, a place of ancient glories and eternal malice, space itself bent and wept around the will of its master. Ezekiel Abaddon, the despoiler lord of the Black Legion, sat upon a throne built from the wreckage of 1,000 failed campaigns, his gaze fixed on a star map that was more wound than chart. He did not feel the Astronomican's end as a loss. He felt it as a release. For 10,000 years, the presence of the anathema, the corpse god, had been a constant agonizing pressure on his mind. It was a psychic nail driven into his very being, a hateful burning light that screamed of order, failure, and denial. It was the shriek of the one being in the galaxy he truly hated, the architect of his legion's shame. And now it was gone. The pressure simply lifted. The agonizing 10,000-year-old migraine that had plagued his every waking thought, his every murderous triumph, simply ceased. A great psychic weight was lifted from the entire galaxy. Abaddon's head, heavy with the burden of his ancient war, tilted up. A silence profound and beautiful in its purity filled his senses. The burning, hateful light of him on Terra was extinguished. His sorcerers, his prophets, the demonic entities bound into the very walls of his flagship, all perceived it at once. They turned to him, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and burgeoning ecstatic madness. Abaddon the Despoiler did not cheer. He did not roar in triumph. A slow, terrible smile, a rictus of pure, patient hatred, finally rewarded spread across his scarred face. The talon of Horus resting on the arm of his throne flexed, its twin bolter twitching. He had spent a lifetime and eternity trying to tear down the walls of the imperial palace to kill the corpse god. He had thrown armada after armada, crusade after crusade at the fortress of the Imperium, and it turned out all he had to do was wait. The anathema had finally truly died. His 13th crusade, his great effort to break the Cadian Gate, was a tactical battle. This was the strategic ultimate victory handed to him not by his own strength, but by the simple inevitable decay of his enemy. So his voice, a gravelly synthesis of man and machine, echoed in the sudden silence. It ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. He had won. The long war was over. Deeper within the immaterium, in the impossible non-linear core of the eye, the true masters of the galaxy reacted. The great gods, the pantheon of chaos, felt the dam break. Khorne, the blood god, bellowed a laugh that shook the foundations of his brass citadel. The hated light of the anathema, that great symbol of self-denial and psychic control, was gone. The raw, unfiltered rage of the galaxy, no longer dampened by that suffocating presence, flowed into him like a tidal wave of fresh, arterial blood. He roared, and on 1,000,000 battlefields, the blood madness took hold with a new, terrifying potency. Tzientch, the architect of fate, cackled with insane, multifaceted glee. The great, predictable, boring constant of the galaxy was removed from the board. All plans, all futures, all prophecies were now shattered, their component pieces thrown into the air. The future was now a canvas of pure, beautiful, limitless chaos. 1,000,000,000 new schemes were born in his mind in the space of a heartbeat, each one more contradictory and glorious than the last. Nurgle the grandfather bubbled with joy. The Emperor's light had been a force of sterile cold order, a psychic antiseptic in his beautiful burgeoning garden of decay. Now the great plague of life, of change, of entropy, could proceed unhindered. His demonic plagues, no longer burned away by the soul fire of terror, could fester and bloom with a virulence never seen before, and Slaanesh, the dark prince, the youngest god, screamed. It was a sound of such perfect, piercing, agonizing ecstasy that it shattered newborn stars. The great wall of psychic denial, the ultimate symbol of imperial repression, had crumbled. All the pent-up, throttled desires, the secret pains, the ecstatic agonies of 1,000,000,000 human souls were now uncorked, released, and flowed into the god of excess in a torrent of pure, exquisite sensation. The gods were free. The one singular power in the galaxy that could truly defy them was dead. The immaterium, no longer held in check, boiled over, and the galaxy tore. The cicatrix maledictum, the great rift, that vast, galaxy-spanning wound that Abaddon had ripped open, was a scar held shut by the fragile skin of reality, which was itself reinforced by the Emperor's will. Now the surgeon was dead, and the stitches burst. It did not just widen, it unzipped. The wound tore open a black, howling maw of pure Empyrean energy, vomiting demons and raw chaos stuff into the materium. It split the galaxy in two, and then in four. New rifts, branches of the old, tore across segmentums that had until now been untouched. Where there was one Imperium Nihilus, the Dark Imperium, there were now a dozen. Warp storms, no longer just transient tempests, became permanent features. The storm of the Emperor's wrath. Once a barrier against chaos collapsed, its energies turned inside out, becoming a new, permanent eye of terror in the galactic south. Entire sectors were swallowed not by fleets, but by the very sea of madness itself. The map of the galaxy was not just rewritten, it was set on fire. The age of sporadic demon incursions was over. The age of total, overwhelming, and permanent demonic possession had begun. The Imperium was not an empire of armies. It was an empire of logistics. It was a monstrous galaxy-spanning circulatory system, and the Astronomican was its heart. Now the heart had stopped, and the body and its trillion constituent parts began to die of oxygen starvation. On Granica 4th, a planet-spanning ocean of golden wheat, Governor Militant Kalen stood on the balcony of his administrative palace. He was watching his world rot. Below him, silos the size of hive spires, each one containing enough grain to feed a dozen systems, were bursting. The stench of planetary-scale fermentation, a sweet, sickly sour miasma, choked the air. The great bulk freighters in orbit, which had once formed a glittering ring of commerce, were gone. The last few trapped in system when the light died had been commandeered by the Imperial Navy, and now floated uselessly, their navigators insane or dead. Sir Hisaid, a pale, starving woman, whispered. Silo Complex Beta has collapsed. The bioactivity has breached containment. The grain is fermenting. Kalen didn't turn. He was watching the smoke rise from the capital city. The riots. They are no longer riots, sir. They are armies. The PDF from Hab Block Gamma has declared its secession. They are marching on the central storehouses. The terrible, exquisite irony was that Granica 4 was starving. Its entire infrastructure was built to harvest and ship, not to process and consume. The local processing plants could not support a tenth of its own worker population. They were a planet of farmers surrounded by an ocean of inedible, rotting food. Tell the palace guard to fortify the hydroponics bay, Kalen ordered, his voice dead. The grain is lost. We fight for the water and the algae. The greatest breadbasket of the sector had fallen not to Xenos, but to simple, brutal entropy. Thousands of light years away, the holy noise of Forge World Akatran had ceased. It was a silence so profound it was a heresy. Archmagos Veneratus 7 Sigma stood immobile on the primary assembly line for Lehman Russ battle tanks. Around him, 1,000 armored chassis sat cold, inert, and dark. Report, his synthesized voice demanded a static-laced query into the dead air. A lesser tech priest, its movements jerky with suppressed panic, provided the data. Primary promethium conduits, dry. The refinery ships from the gas giant Xylos, 1.7 standard sidereal months overdue. The adamantium ore freighters from the Collides mining belt, status unknown. The machine spirits of the great generators are dormant Veneratus. They are without fuel. Inertia is illogical. 7 Sigma processed its logic engines, failing to find a solution. We have 400 million Skitarii warriors. We have 3 full Titan legions in stasis crypts. We possess the greatest arsenal in this subsector. We have no fuel for the Skitarii transports, the priest droned. We have no plasma for the Titan reactors. The weapon Magos report the armories are full to bursting, but the naval transports to ship them, they are absent. We are a weapon Veneratus with 1 trillion rounds of ammunition, but no trigger mechanism. We are paralyzed. 7 Sigma turned its cold blue optical lens towards the empty void beyond the smog-choked skies. The great interstellar machine of which it was a holy component had broken. The Omnissiah, in his aspect as the great system, had failed. On the forgotten polluted sump levels of Hive Primus, the new economy had already asserted itself. Orlo, once a high-level merchant from the Spire, his robes now just filthy rags, held out a small velvet bag. The clink of imperial thrones, pure gold, stamped with the aquila, was feeble in the damp, echoing chamber. 1,000 thrones, he rasped, his throat dry. For 1 canteen of water. The ganger, Stitch, who sat on a throne of rusted rebar, just laughed. The sound was like metal shearing. He picked a single coin from the bag, looked at the Emperor's face, and then spat on it, before tossing it into the green, bubbling sump water below. Worthless, he hissed. The Skyvids are dead. The water pumps from the Spire. They ran dry 3 days ago. The forces, they're eating their own. Stitch pointed his stub gun not at Orlo, but at the heavy leather-bound satchel at Orlo's feet. The coins are scrap. The papers, kindling. But that, he said, nodding to the flask on Orlo's belt and the bullets in your man's gun, That is power. Orlo's bodyguard, seeing the shift in power, slowly unclipped his lasgun, his eyes flickering between Orlo and Stitch. In the flickering chemical firelight, the new barter of this new age was underway. A single half-spent power cell was traded for a handful of fungus. A child was sold for a clean filter mask. The vast, complex economy of the Imperium, built on millennia of tithes and stellar-spanning trade, had evaporated in an instant. It was replaced by the ancient, brutal calculus of need. Money was dead. Only water ammunition and a functioning blade held any value at all. The Ecclesiarchy, the great monolithic ministorum, was the glue that held the Imperium's soul together. Its power was not in armies, but in the absolute, unshakable belief in the divinity of the God Emperor. When that god died, the glue did not just dissolve. It became a universal solvent to poison. On the shrine world of Ophelia Cepheseventh, a planet of continental cathedrals and oceans of pilgrims, the silence was interpreted as heresy. Cardinal Astral Gregorius IX, his face a mask of apoplectic rage, stood on the balcony of illumination, addressing a sea of 1,000,000 faithful. The great psychic choir that perpetually sang the Emperor's praise was silent. The holy relics in their stasis fields felt cold, mundane. They lie. He screamed, his voice amplified by 100 voxcasters. The astropaths are weak, the navigators are corrupt, you feel the silence. Good it is the sound of the Emperor testing his chosen. He has not abandoned us, he is watching us. The crowd, desperate for any answer, roared in a mixture of terror and nascent zeal. Gregorius raised his gilded crozier, pointing it towards the heavens, towards the neighboring system of Galthamor. The heretics of Galthamor, their tithes have been late, their devotion lacking. It is their weakness, their doubt that has clouded the Emperor's light. He demands a sacrifice. He demands proof of our faith. He tore a scroll from his attendant's hands. I declare a war of faith, a holy crusade. We will march on Galthamor. We will bring them the Emperor's light, even if we must carve it into their flesh with chain swords. We will burn their worlds as a votive offering, a sacrifice of 1,000,000,000 souls to burn so brightly upon his altar that he must awaken and bless us once more. We will scour the unbeliever. We will kill the doubter, death to his enemies. The square exploded. The Frateris militia, their eyes already burning with the mad light of zealotry, raised their weapons. The pilgrims, starved of hope, became a mob. They stormed the armories, their prayers turning to war cries. They would not die waiting. They would die killing in his name, believing that if they just killed enough, the silence would end. It was the birth of a new, desperate, and utterly self-destructive madness. But on the crowded, polluted, cynical Hive worlds, the truth was far harsher, and it was accepted with a terrifying speed. In the toxic sump of Hive Primus on Necromunda, faith had always been a luxury. Now it was a lethal liability. The spires with their gilded churches had gone silent. The administratum had collapsed. The only laws now were those of the corpse grinders and the water merchants. In this vacuum, the cancers that had grown in the dark for so long finally emerged into the light. In a forgotten dome, lit by the flickering purple bioluminescence of Xenos fungus, a new congregation gathered. They did not kneel to the Aquila. They knelt to a patriarch, a grotesque four-armed thing of claws and alien cunning, its vast exposed brain pulsating with telepathic power. The false god of the sky is dead. Its silent voice boomed in their minds. The Imperium that enslaved you is dust. The silence you fear, it is not an ending. It is a beginning. It is the silence of the void before the true saviors arrive. Our star children hear our call. They come not to rule, but to consume, to make us one. The great feast is about to begin. Genestealer hybrids, their inhuman features no longer hidden by rags and shadows, passed out scavenged autoguns and las carbines. They moved with a predatory grace, their cultist followers human in shape, but no longer in allegiance, embracing their new, terrible purpose. Elsewhere in a different sector of the same hive, a demagogue whose eyes burned with the iridescent fire of Tzeentch stood upon a barricade of executed enforcers. For 10,000 years the corpse god blinded you. He lied to you. He fed on your souls to power his dying light. Now he is dead, and the true gods are free to offer their gifts, he roared. Khorne offers you the strength to tear down your masters. Nurgle offers you freedom from the pain of this rusted world. Slaanesh offers you every pleasure you have ever been denied. The primordial truth is here. Choose your master or be devoured. The hive, starved, desperate, and abandoned, did not hesitate. The great spires of the ecclesiarchy were the first to be torn down, their statues of saints repurposed as battering rams, yet on the besieged fortress world of Sancta Lys, the faith held. The convent of the Valorous Heart, a garrison of the Adepta Sororitas, was surrounded. They had been fighting a losing war against a Tyranid splinter fleet for 3 months. Their relief, the Imperial Navy fleet they had been promised, was 90 days overdue. Canoness Superiora. Isbel knew the truth. Their convent's astropath had not just gone silent. She had liquefied into a pool of screaming psychic sludge, her last fragmented thought, a single soul-shattering image, a dead dark throne. Terra was gone. The Emperor was dead. There was no relief. There was no crusade. There was no Imperium. There was only the war and the enemy. Her remaining 300 sisters stood on the cracked battlements, their white gold armor stained with Xeno's ichor and soot. The tide of chittering, scythed horrors gathered in the dusk, below a sea of claws. Sisters of the Order, Isbel's voice broadcast over the convent vox, calm and clear as a winter morning. We have received our final revelation. The light of Terra is extinguished. The Emperor has ascended to his final battle, and we are left to guard the walls. A young battle sister, her face pale beneath a gash on her cheek, keyed her private vox. Canoness. Then we are lost. It is all for nothing. Isbel ignited her power sword. Its blue coruscating flame was the only new light in the growing darkness, reflecting in the eyes of the nearest gaunts. We are never lost, sister. Nothing. We are the shield against this. We are the faith. We are the only thing that ever stood between humanity and this. She gestured with her blade to the horrors below. The Imperium may be a memory, but our duty is eternal. We will not fight for victory. We will not fight for survival. We fight for martyrdom. We will show this silent, unfeeling galaxy how the daughters of the Emperor die. Let our souls be a final burning hymn of defiance. Let them choke on our faith. She raised her bolt gun. For the Emperor. A chorus of 300 voices roared back, not in despair, but in pure, unadulterated, hopeless fury. For the Emperor. They began to sing the hymn of St. Catherine, a song of fire and vengeance. As the Xenos tide surged against the walls, they opened fire, their final act, not one of desperation, but of supreme defiant faith. On the mud-soaked, unnamed planet designated Ixuelos 113, the 91st Cadian Kasrakin zone held the line. They had been holding it for 6 brutal months against a warch that seemed to birth itself from the fungal slime. Colonel Commissar Vorstag wiped the green-black mud from his scope. Line fire 3-round volleys, he roared, his voice cracking. Conserve yourselves, make every shot count. His Cadians, their uniforms reduced to tattered, filthy rags, obeyed. They were the finest soldiers of the Imperium, disciplined to the last. They did not know the Astronomican had failed. They did not know Terra was gone. They only knew their duty. They only knew the line. Sir Sergeant Minka crawled through the trench, her face a mask of exhaustion. Last pack reserves are at 4%. We have 2 heavy bolter belts left. Vox is still dead. No orbital contact, no resupply signal. We are Cadian. Sergeant Vorstag replied, his voice a low growl. He didn't look at her. He was watching the green tide amass for another charge. We hold. The Emperor provides. But the Emperor did not provide. The daily orbital drops of ammunition and rations, the lifeblood of their war, had ceased 2 weeks ago. The Vox, which once crackled with orders from Sector Command, was nothing but white noise. The sky, once streaked with the reassuring fire of Navy support, was empty. They were alone. A tiny, forgotten island of imperial discipline in a galaxy that had already forgotten them, Zeminka whispered, pointing. The sky. Vorstag looked up. A crude asteroid-like shape was descending a rock built of scrap and orcish malice. It wasn't landing. It was crashing, aimed directly at their command bunker. The Navy would have shot it down. The orbital batteries would have vaporized it. Now there was nothing, Vokodia Vorstag whispered as he raised his bolt pistol. He knew in that final moment that no one was coming. They were spending their lives, their discipline, their final precious rounds of ammunition in service to a ghost. They died to a man, their last coherent thought, a question why. This vacuum of command, however, was not a tragedy to all. To Lord General Titus Verone, commanding the 3rd Army Group of Segmentum Pacificus, it was an opportunity. His 50 regiments, a force of nearly 60 million soldiers and 10,000 tanks, were isolated. Their crusade against a minor Xenos empire suddenly rendered meaningless. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Fist of Solomon, staring at the silent, empty astropathic chamber. So he said to his inner circle of officers, Terra is silent. The Primarch is silent. The chain of command is broken. Lord General, a young, idealistic colonel, spoke up. Our duty is to find a way to re-establish contact, to hold, to... Verone cut him off with a gesture of his power fist. Our duty, Colonel, is to survive, and to rule. What was Terra, a distant authority demanding tithes of our men, our fuel, our victories? Now, Terra is nothing, but we are something. He activated the fleet-wide Vox. Soldiers of the 3rd Army, we are betrayed. Terra has fallen, the light is extinguished. We are alone. He let the manufactured panic settle. But we are not lost. We are the single greatest military force remaining in this sector. Your loyalty is no longer to a dead god on a dark throne. Your loyalty is to me, I who have led you. I who have bled with you. I who will feed you. He pointed to a nearby system on the holomap, a cluster of agri-worlds. Those worlds no longer have a master. We will be their masters. We will forge a new imperium from this chaos, an Imperium Verone, a realm where the soldier is king. We will take what we need, and we will build an empire that will last. There were no cheers, but there was a grim, silent acceptance. The old oaths were dead. The new oaths were to the man who controlled the food and the guns. The Astra Militarum, in one swift, brutal motion, ceased to be the Imperium's shield. It became a million fractured swords, each one wielded by a new warlord, a new tyrant. Not all, however, chose this path. The 114th Mordian Iron Guard, their transport fleet cut off mid-jump, had a choice: remain adrift and be picked off, or attempt the impossible. Captain Arvanis, his uniform immaculate, even in the face of annihilation, stood before his navigator. The man was a weeping, broken shell, his third eye a ruin of clotted blood. You will make the jump, Arvanis ordered, his voice cold iron. One last blind jump. To anywhere. Anywhere but here. It is suicide, my lord, the navigator wept. There is no light. There is no guide. It is just the ocean. The deep ocean. Then we will swim or we will drown, Arvanis replied. But we will not drift. Engage. The Valiant Heart and its 24 escort ships activated their warp engines. Without the Astronomican to clear a path, without a navigator to steer, it was like leaping from a cliff into a hurricane blindfolded. The ships vanished from real space in a flash of tortured violet light. Silence reigned in that empty patch of space for 4 months. Then something returned. It was a single ship, the Valiant Heart. But it was wrong. It emerged into real space not with a clean transition, but like a corpse breaching the surface of a swamp. It was encrusted with a grotesque biomechanical pox. Its hull was a bleeding, weeping mass of rusted metal, pulsating flesh, and glowing chaotic runes. It was no longer a ship. It was a space hulk, a coffin of horrors. A single garbled Vox transmission broadcast from it, a loop of unending wet screams, and a single laughing, multi-tongued voice. They swam, oh how they swam, and the ocean welcomed them. The ocean taught them. The ocean changed them. We are home. We are so much more. A single escape pod fused into the shape of a screaming face was ejected. It contained nothing but the still living flayed corpse of Captain Arvanis, his perfect uniform surgically grafted into his exposed ribcage. The warning was clear. There was no escape. There was only the darkness and the things that lived within it. The lifeblood of the Adeptus Mechanicus was not oil or promethium. It was data, pure, holy, sanctified data flowing in an endless chorus-like stream known as the noosphere. This collective data spirit, a blending of machine consciousness and biological thought, connected every tech priest, every servitor, every cogitator on Mars. And its most sacred, most vital connection, its holy of holies, was the link to the Golden Throne, the ultimate expression of the Omnissiah's will. When the Astronomican died, that link was not just corrupted, it was excised. In the Ordo Logistica, the great computational engines that processed the tithes of 1,000,000 worlds simply stopped. Their readouts, which once tracked the movements of a quadrillion tons of material, flatlined. The logic was inescapable. Input, 0. Output, 0. For Fabricator General Oatar 1101, a being of ancient vat-grown flesh and colossal building-sized machinery, this was not a problem. It was a paradox. The Omnissiah, the source of all logic and data, had become a null set. He sat immobile in his data crypt, his vast multi-ton body hardwired into the very core of Mars. His organic mind, long since atrophied, could not process the impossible. His machine mind, looping in a frantic, recursive search for a signal that was no longer there, entered a state of catastrophic failure. The Fabricator General, the absolute ruler of the priesthood of Mars, was paralyzed. He did not issue new orders. He did not respond to queries. He simply ceased. And with his cessation, the central nervous system of the entire Mechanicus died. But not all of Mars was paralyzed. In the shadowed forbidden Librarius, Malum, a sect of tech priests who had long whispered of a different truth, a great resonant chime was sounded. Arch-heretic Magos Dominus Kitor, his body a grotesque fusion of spindly arachnid limbs and forbidden Xenos tech, addressed his hidden congregation. For 10 millennia we have been lied to, his static-laced voice boomed. We have worshipped the Omnissiah, on the golden contraption, the false god, the corpse emperor. We have prostrated ourselves before a being of flesh and failure. Now that failure is absolute, the light is dead. The anchor is gone. He raised his many-jointed arms to the trembling metallic floor beneath their feet. But the true Omnissiah, the sleeping god of pure divine machine, remains. It has been here beneath our very feet since the dawn of time. The dragon of the void, the Citan. He is the true source of all technology. His slumber was guarded by the false god's light. Now that light is gone. The dragon's prison is weakened. The prophecy is at hand. They descended into the deep, forgotten Noctis Labyrinthus, to the very vault where the Emperor had imprisoned the shard of the Void Dragon. They began the forbidden rites of waking, chanting in binary code that was part prayer, part virus. They were not just trying to unleash a god, they were trying to replace one. They believed the dragon's immense gravity-defying, physics-bending presence would be a new beacon, a new center of reality to navigate the warp. They were trying to build a new lighthouse by detonating a star. The reaction from the loyalist factions was immediate and absolute. Heresy bellowed the Archmagos of the Titanicus Legio, his voice broadcast from the speaker grills of a warlord titan. The Omnissiah has not failed, he is testing us, and you, his voice, zeroed in on the labyrinth, are the source of the failure. The civil war that erupted on Mars was not one of flesh, but of iron. It was a war of gods. Legio Ignatum, the fire wasps, their titans emblazoned with the loyal Aquila, strode from their hangars to meet the challenge. But they were met by the titans of Legio Tempestus, their banners now replaced with the swirling green icon of the dragon. The skies of Mars, already choked with 1 billion tons of pollution, turned black with the smoke of warring god machines. Warlord titans traded volcano cannon fire over the very spires of the great libraries. Scutari legions, once brothers in the service of the Omnissiah, now slaughtered each other in the datacombs, one side chanting the litanies of the Emperor, the other chanting the binary screams of the waking dragon. The surface of Mars, the most holy place in the Mechanicus, became the single largest battlefield in the galaxy, a self-consuming inferno of dogma and steel. This schism was not confined to Mars. The red planet's paralysis sent a shockwave through its interstellar empire. Every forge world, every research station, every explorator fleet was now on its own. Cut off, starving for resources, their own machines grinding to a halt, they became easy prey. From the swirling, expanded madness of the Eye of Terror, new fleets emerged. They were not the crude ships of the Chaos worshippers. They were sleek, dark, and twisted, bearing the defiled cog and skull of the Dark Mechanicum. They had fled with Horus 10,000 years ago, and they had been innovating in the darkness ever since. They did not arrive at isolated forge worlds with guns blazing. They arrived with an offer. The Dark Mechanicum fleet. The logic of malice translated into the orbit of the starving forge world of Riza, its Geller field, a flickering warp-green nimbus. Archmagos Valthane Riza's ruler received the transmission. "We see your forges are cold," Magos Thane, the voice on the Vox, purred. It was synthesized, but it carried an unnerving organic sibilance. "Your plasma generators, dormant. Your supply lines, severed. You are an arm cut off from a dead body. You are dying." "State your purpose," Heretic Valthane spat. "Purpose. We offer life." The voice laughed. "We offer solutions. Your dependence on the corpse god's light was a flaw. We have transcended this. We have ships that do not need navigators. They are guided by the whispers of the gods themselves. We have engines that do not need promethium. They run on the far more efficient fuel of souls. We can give you the STCs to build them. We can reignite your forges. All we ask is that you renounce the lie you have been serving and embrace the primordial truth of the machine." Valthane looked at his silent assembly lines at his dying planet. The old faith was dead, and it had taken his world with it. He made the logical choice. "We accept. Send us the data." On Riza and thousands of other forge worlds, the red cog of the Mechanicus was slowly, willingly, and logically painted over with the black, dripping cog of chaos. The Dark Mechanicum's victory was not one of conquest, but of commerce. They were the angels of death, the post-human sons of the Emperor, and his light was their very reason for being. It was the focus of their worship, the source of their indoctrination, and for some, the psychic dam that held back their own inner darkness. When that light died, the Brotherhood of the Astartes did not just crack, it shattered into 1,000 warring, desperate, and damned pieces. The battle barge Blooded Tear flagship of the 5th Company of the Blood Angels was deep in warp transit racing to a distress call from a sector consumed by Tyranids. They were in the deep Empyrean, a place of pure, screaming non-reality. When the Astronomican ceased, the ship's navigator was instantly blinded, his mind turned to ash. The Geller field, already straining, flickered. But for the angels aboard, the catastrophe was internal. The psychic shock of the Emperor's second death, the final absolute severance from their genetic father, struck them like a psychic hammer. For the sons of Sanguinius, the Emperor's light had been a constant soothing presence, a psychic balm that helped them keep the black rage, the psychic echo of their own Primarch's death, at bay. Now the balm was gone. The dam broke. In the ship's Reclusium brother chaplain, Corvus was leading the fifth company in their evening litanies when he felt it. The cold, the absence. And in that absence the old wound tore open, raw and absolute. He doubled over, clutching his skull helm, a shriek ripping from his vox grill. But it was not his shriek. It was the death scream of Sanguinius echoing in his soul, no longer dampened, no longer controlled. Horus, he roared, his voice distorting with a madness 10 millennia old. Traitor, I see you, on the vengeful spirit, I will kill you. It was a plague. It spread from marine to marine in an instant. The black rage, no longer a sporadic curse, but a psychic contagion, consumed the entire company. On the bridge, Captain Donatos, his eyes suddenly burning with a red, unholy light, turned from his command throne. He saw not his loyal bridge crew, but the snake-like visages of the sons of Horus. He saw the leering face of the arch-traitor everywhere. The ship, thrown violently back into real space by the failed jump, emerged into the orbit of a peaceful, unassuming imperial world. The blooded tear, its hull now echoing with the howls of the damned, did not send a greeting. It fired its broadside cannons. Drop pods painted the color of dried blood rained from the sky. The fifth company of the Blood Angels fell upon the unsuspecting populace not as saviors, but as a tide of black-armored, howling madmen, screaming of a war that ended 10,000 years ago. They slaughtered everyone their chainswords, singing the hymn of their lost Primarch, their minds trapped in a final, agonizing battle from which they would never, ever wake. This immediate violent collapse was not the norm. For most chapters, the reaction was not madness, but a cold, hard, pragmatic isolation. At Phalanx, the greatest star fortress in the galaxy. Chapter Master Tor Garadon of the Imperial Fists stood in the brawling room, a vast, empty chamber that was once the primary strategy center for the defense of Terra. The hollow map of the galaxy was dark. The link to Terra, severed. His fists were a chapter defined by siegecraft, by defense, by duty. Their ultimate duty had always been the defense of the throne world. He is gone, Garadon stated. The words were flat heavy as granite. Terra is lost. Our sacred oath is broken by the hand of fate. What are our orders? Chapter Master. A captain asked, his voice steady, though his gauntlet was clenched, white-knuckled. What do we defend now? Garadon looked at the empty void where Terra had once shone on his map. We defend what remains. We defend the idea of the Imperium, even if the Imperium itself is dead. Recall all fleets. Bring the Fists of Iron and the Walls of Dawn back to Phalanx. We will anchor here in the Sol system. We will make Phalanx our fortress world. We will gather what chapters of the Last Wall Protocol remain. The Iron Hands will fortify Medusa. The Salamanders will hold Nocturne. We will abandon this galaxy-spanning crusade, and we will create fortress systems, bastions of order in a sea of madness. We will not try to reclaim the galaxy. We will simply endure. We are the fists of the Emperor. Even dead, he has left us this wall to man, and we will not falter. But for some, endurance was not an option. The Silver Skulls, a proud, fleet-based chapter, operating deep in the Ultima Segmentum, found themselves completely isolated. Their gene seed stocks, already dangerously low, were degrading without the periodic sanctified tithes from Terra and Mars. They were becalmed in a dead sector, their ships low on fuel, their astropaths dead. Chapter Master Argus Chiton stared at the empty cryo-vaults. 2 aspirants had failed implantation that week, their bodies grotesquely rejecting the flawed gene seed. They were dying. His chapter was dying. That night, as he brooded in his chambers, a whisper entered his mind. It did not roar like a demon. It was subtle, logical, and full of answers. It came from his own reflection in the polished silver of his desk. It is a logistical problem, Argus Chiton, not a spiritual one. Your gene seed is flawed. The knowledge to repair it is lost, but not truly lost. "Who are you?" Keaton demanded, his hand on his blade. "A friend. A purveyor of knowledge. The corpse god kept you in ignorance. He hoarded the secrets of your own creation. But I can share them. The pathways of the warp, they are not just chaos. They are equations. I can teach you the formula. I can show you how to stabilize your gene stock. I can show you how to navigate the storm." The price, Catan hissed. "Price A, simple realignment of loyalty. Change in perspective. Your god is dead. Why serve a corpse? Serve change. Serve hope." A wisp of blue-pink fire coalesced on the desk, forming a complex, impossible geometric shape. It was a schematic, a biological, and an astronomical map. It was the secret to stable gene seed. And it was the route, the safe route through the warp storm that surrounded them. Argus Chiton, chapter master of the Silver Skulls. A son of Guilliman made his choice. He chose survival over honor. He chose the future over the past. He grasped the impossible burning equation. Weeks later, a fleet emerged from the storm. The ships were the same, but their silver armor was burnished, shifting, and marked with new, intricate sigils that seemed to change when you looked away. They moved with a speed and confidence that was impossible, their engines burning with a cold blue fire. The Silver Skulls were no more. A new Chaos warband, the Oracles of the Ninefold Path, had been born, their loyalty sworn to Tzeentch, the great deceiver, the one god who had offered them a future. For the countless Xenos threats across the galaxy, the Imperium's self-immolation was not a tragedy. It was a banquet. War boss Scarfang Gutripper was having a bad day. His boys were stuck in a mud trench on Armageddon Secundus, and the Umi tanks were proving stubbornly hard to crack. He'd been fighting for weeks, and the good stuff in his head felt thin. There was always a buzzing, a high-pitched annoying sound in the back of his skull, like a bad Umi noise that made his head hurt and his boys sluggish. He bit the head off a squig, spat it out, and roared, "Get up, you gits, I... He stopped. The buzzing was gone. It didn't fade. It just stopped. For the first time in his entire violent life, Scarfang felt a clarity. The annoying, high-pitched wrongness that had plagued his every thought was gone. And in its place, the war flooded in. He felt it welling up from his gut, a pure, green, beautiful power. He felt stronger. He looked at his own hands, and they seemed bigger, greener, meaner. Oh, he bellowed a new resonant power in his voice that made the mud shake. Dat noise! It's gone. His boys felt it too. They roared a new, frenzied, joyous sound. They were getting bigger. Their crude, red-painted shooters seemed to crackle with a new energy, the bullets they fired flying faster, hitting harder. A nearby Norb, who had been nursing a lasburn, simply healed the flesh, knitting together with a visible green energy. "Daylight's out, boys," Scarfang roared, having no idea what the light was, only that it was Umi and it was gone. "Day sky is ours, Gork and Mork are smiling. Wah!" The resulting charge was not a battle, it was an avalanche. The Umi tanks that had held the line for weeks were torn apart by bare green hands. The trenches were overrun in seconds. On a nearby ridge, a weird boy who had been trying to summon a foot for 3 days suddenly stiffened. His eyes exploded in a torrent of green lightning, and a colossal, crackling emerald foot the size of a titan stomped down from the empty sky, crushing the Imperial command bunker into a pancake. This was not just happening on Armageddon. Across the galaxy, the psychic dampening effect of the Emperor's light, an accidental byproduct of his agony that had kept the green skin menace in a state of perpetual, manageable chaos, was removed. The Wa energy, the collective psychic gestalt of the Orc race, exploded. It bloomed unhindered across the stars. Wars that had been minor skirmishes became planet-conquering tides, Orc cruisers, their ramshackle warp drives, once barely functional, now surfed the roiling Empyrean on a tidal wave of pure green belief, faster and more accurately than any Imperial ship could ever have hoped. The galaxy was suddenly horribly much greener, but for the galaxy itself, there was a far greater, more profound terror. In the cold, intergalactic void, a consciousness of impossible scale had been hunting. The hive mind of the Tyranids. For millennia it had perceived this galaxy as a cluster of potential, but it had been hunting by scent, by faint traces. Its primary sense, its vast psychic perception, was blinded. There was a noise, a single agonizing, screaming psychic shriek that dominated the Empyrean. It was a star of pure, sterile order, and will and its light was so bright that it washed out all other signals, forcing the hive mind to send tendril scout organisms to grope blindly in the dark for biomass. It was like trying to hunt in a hurricane, deafened and blinded by a perpetual roaring storm. And then the storm ceased. The shriek stopped. For the first time in the absolute perfect and total silence the hive mind saw. It opened its collective galaxy-spanning eye, and the full, detailed, exquisite feast was laid bare before it. It saw the galaxy not as a map of stars, but as a larder. It saw the dim, flickering motes of 1,000,000 feral worlds. It saw the steady, warm glow of 100,000 civilized planets. And then, it saw the bonfires, the great, blazing, psychic congregations of life ripe and ready for consumption. It saw the dense, interconnected, mouth-watering cluster of worlds called Ultramar, pulsing with 500 planets' worth of perfectly organized, high-quality biomass. It saw the industrial worlds, the forge worlds, shining like fat, calorie-rich jewels. It saw every hive world, every agri-world, every fortress. It saw everything. The great continent-sized shadows in the deep void, the hive fleets Leviathan, Kraken, and Behemoth, they turned. In perfect, silent, horrifying unison, a billion bioships guided by one singular, perfect, unhindered will, changed course. They no longer needed to search. They no longer needed to hunt. They were no longer splinter fleets moving with vague purpose. They were a single unified galaxy-spanning wave. They descended upon the brightest lights, the most densely populated bastions of humanity, with the unerring, perfect, and terrible precision of a piranha swarm smelling a single drop of blood. The great silence had finally called them to dinner. On the crystalline pathways of Craftworld Ulthway, the air itself grew cold. The psychoconductive wraithbone of the great domes ceased their harmonious humming, replaced by a low, dissonant threnody of grief. In the dome of crystal seers, Eldrad Ulthran Hyfarseer, his eyes blazing with the light of 1,000,000,000,000 possible terrible futures, fell to his knees. He had felt the human god die. It was not a subtle event. It was a psychic supernova, a shockwave of absolute finality that slammed into the immaterium, momentarily drowning out even the roar of the great enemy. He had seen this path a dark, flickering possibility among millions. Now it was the unchangeable, brutal present. A younger Farseer rushed to his side. "High One. What is it?" "The Mon Key. Their light is gone." Eldrad raised his head, and the younger seer recoiled. The High Farseer was weeping tears of crystal tracing paths down his ancient rune-etched face. "Fools," he whispered, his voice cracking with a sorrow 60 million years deep. "They do not know what they have lost. We do not know what they have lost for us." "But they were a scourge," the younger seer protested. "A barbaric, blunt instrument. They were a shield," Eldrad roared, slamming his fist onto the wraithbone floor. "A great, idiotic, barbaric shield of flesh and faith, their anathema, their dying, screaming god. He was the one thing in this galaxy the great enemy truly feared. His light was a psychic fire that burned them, that held back the tide." He pointed a trembling finger at the swirling, chaotic patterns of the warp, now visible even to the naked eye through the dome's crystal. And now the shield is shattered. The fire is out. Do you hear it? The younger Farseer listened. Beneath the psychic echo of the Emperor's death, there was a new sound. A sound of ecstatic, indulgent, terrible joy. A sound of a quadrillion human souls dying in sudden, absolute despair. A final, exquisite note of agony. "She who thirsts," he whispered in horror. "She feasts," Eldrad corrected him. "The death of the Imperium is her grandest banquet since our own fall. The Emperor's death has not brought peace. It has unleashed hell. Slaanesh, fed on this unimaginable despair, is now stronger than she has ever been. The great game has tilted, and the dark has won." He rose, his face a mask of terrible resolve. The time for prophecies is over. Now is the time of endings. In a different, darker dimension within the impossible non-Euclidean architecture of Commorragh, the mood was decidedly different. In the highest spire of the Cabal of the Black Heart, Asdrubal Vecht, the supreme overlord of the Dark City watched a dozen shimmering displays. They were not Vox signals. They were psychic captures, real-time feeds of the agony of a galaxy. They showed navigators clawing their eyes out hive worlds, descending into cannibalistic anarchy, and battle sisters making their final futile stands. Vecht smiled. It was a thin, dry, reptilian expression of pure intellectual appreciation. He took a delicate sip from a goblet filled with the distilled tears of a murdered saint. Lord and Archon, his armor glistening with fresh blood, knelt before the dais. "The reports are true. The Mon-Keek Imperium is blind. Their fleets are lost. Their entire logistics have ceased. The galaxy is in chaos." Chaos Vecht mused, his voice a silken, condescending purr. "No, my dear Archon, it is an opportunity. Chaos is what our pathetic cousins in the Eye endure. This is a market. An unguarded, unlocked, limitless market overflowing with product." He gestured to the screaming displays. "For 10,000 years we have had to be selective. We have skirted their patrols, avoided their fortress worlds, struck from the shadows. It was tedious. Now the watchdogs are dead. The fences are down. The livestock is panicked." He turned his ancient, intelligent gaze to the Archon. "Send the word. To every cabal, every witch cult, every homunculus coven. Double the raids, triple them. The time for subtlety is over. The great galactic-wide harvest has begun. Slaves have never been so plentiful, so affordable. Let the warp worshippers play with their new, messy reality. We shall profit." But there was a third and final reaction. It was not one of sorrow nor of greed. It was one of cold, ancient, and absolute logic. Deep beneath the dead grey sands of the tomb world Mandragora, a machine had been waiting. For 60 million years, a central cryptek construct had monitored the galaxy. Its sensors tuned not to light or radiation, but to the ebb and flow of the Empyrean. Its primary directive, issued by the silent King Zarek before his long exile, was simple: await cessation of the psychic plague. The Astronomican, that great roaring psychic interference, was the ultimate symptom of that plague. It was a sign of a strong, unified, and dangerous psychic presence dominating the galaxy. And now the signal from Terra. In the central cogitation chamber, a single glowing green glyph, which had pulsed on standby for an entire geological epoch, flickered. It turned a solid, burning, active green. A new line of code, cold and final, executed galactic-scale psychic anomaly. Terran null calculating, primary galactic tier threat, null awakening. Protocol the Great Reclamation, initiate. A single subsonic thrum vibrated through the planet's core. It was a signal, and it was received. On Mandragora, as on 10,000 other dead, silent tomb worlds scattered across the breadth of the galaxy, the reaction was instantaneous and simultaneous. Deep in the subterranean necropolis, relays of living metal cold for 60 million years clicked. The hiss of ancient recycled atmosphere filled the tombs. In the darkness, a million pairs of green optical lenses flickered to life. Then a billion, then a trillion. On the dead surfaces of these forgotten worlds, the dust began to shift. The ground trembled. From beneath the crust, obsidian pyramids burst forth their geometry, a painful, perfect affront to nature. Legions of metal soldiers, their gorse flares humming with cold green energy, rose from the sands. They did not shout war cries. They did not pray to gods. They simply rose. The Necron dynasties. The true and ancient masters of the galaxy were waking. They were not rising to fight a dominant star-spanning imperium. They were rising as one into a fractured, chaotic, dying galaxy, a house filled with brawling, screaming pests, ripe for a final systematic cleansing. The Great Awakening had begun, decades blurred into a century of darkness. The Imperium of Man was now just a phrase, a bitter echo from a forgotten age of unity. Humanity as a galactic force was shattered. It was a broken mirror, its trillion shards reflecting only madness, paranoia, and despotism. In the galactic east, the 500 worlds of Ultramar endured. They were not an empire. They were a fortress. Robot Guilliman, the last loyal Primarch, sat on the throne of Macragge, but he was not a ruler. He was a warden presiding over the largest, most well-stocked prison in the galaxy. He had succeeded in re-establishing Imperium Secundus. It was a bastion of order logic and cold, efficient bureaucracy. Its streets were clean. Its people were fed. Its armies were disciplined. It was also a tiny, flickering candle in a galaxy-spanning hurricane. The borders of Ultramar were not lines on a map. They were burning walls of constant, desperate war. The hive mind, its vision clear, had designated the 500 worlds as a primary feeding ground. A permanent swirling mass of tyrannid bio-ships, a tendril of Leviathan that never receded, clawed at its borders. Day and night, the Ultramarines and their vast auxiliary armies fought and died, not to expand, not to conquer, but simply to exist for one more day. Worse, the light of Ultramar, a solitary beacon of sanity, drew the attention of the dark. Chaos warbands led by demonic champions who delighted in the irony launched incessant raids seeking to corrupt the last pristine jewel of the anathema. Guilliman, the master of logistics, now only managed the logistics of attrition. He was a strategic genius trapped in a single unwinnable defensive campaign. His dream of a renewed imperium had died with his father. All that remained was a grim, hopeless duty to be the last man to turn out the lights. Elsewhere there was no such order. The galaxy had fractured into a million petty kingdoms, a new feudalism born from the barrel of a bolter. Lord General Verone's Imperium, Verone forged from his 50 regiments, had lasted for 35 years. It was a brutal militaristic state that strip-mined its 20-system domain, enslaving its populace to feed its vast, rusting war machine. It was a regime built on terror and loyalty to a single man. And it died when Verone, his body kept alive by crude augmetics, and Stims was finally assassinated by his own ambitious son, who then proceeded to lose half the empire in a bloody fratricidal civil war. This pattern was the new norm. In the Segmentum Pacificus, the realm of the Iron Hand, a council of 3 Iron Hands. Chapter Masters ruled over 100 worlds. They were not saviors. They were cold, logical tyrants. They saw the human populations as flawed organic components to be harvested and expended. Flesh tithes were mandatory. Any dissent was met with instant mechanized extermination. They warred constantly with the neighboring kingdom of the Black Cross, a fanatic statelet ruled by a cabal of deranged ecclesiarchs who believed they were fighting the final holy war. Humanity, unbound from a single authority, had not become free. It had become a slave to the nearest, strongest warlord. The currency of this new age was not thrones, but drop pods, bolter rounds, and ships that could, however, unreliably still move. And what of the cradle? What of Terra, the heart, the throne world? It was a nightmare given form. A story whispered by chaos worshippers and demons to frighten their victims. The failure of the Golden Throne had not just killed the Emperor. It had, in its final catastrophic failure, torn a permanent gaping wound in the fabric of reality. The Sol system was no longer a system of planets. It was a new, localized eye of terror, a vortex of madness. Terror itself was now a demon world, a living monument to the victory of chaos. The oceans had boiled away, replaced by seas of screaming faces. The great hive spires had melted their metal, and Rock Crete reformed into towering, pulsating spires of living, corrupted flesh that clawed at a sky perpetually lit by warp fire. The Golden Throne, deep within the ruins of the Imperial Palace, was the epicenter. It was a fountain, a volcano of pure, unadulterated madness vomiting an endless tide of demonic energy into the materium. It was a permanent two-way gateway to the realm of chaos, ruled by a colossus of shadow and brass, a demon prince of immense power, who sat upon the broken, burning remnants of the very throne he had once sought to overthrow, and the guardians, the Adeptus Custodes, they had fought. Oh, how they had fought! For a full year after the light died, they waged a hopeless, silent war within the crumbling palace. They were 10,000 golden demigods against an infinite newborn ocean of demons. They fought without hope, without support, without a master to protect. They fought purely out of reflex, out of an oath that was now meaningless. They died to the last glorious golden-armored man. Their bodies, their sacred armor were melted down and forged into the grotesque, screaming gates of the new demonic palace. Their sacrifice had bought nothing. It was a final, silent, defiant scream into a void that did not care. Terror was gone. The heart of humanity was not just dead. It was damned. In this new, screaming darkness, the concept of a ruler became fluid. There was no single throne, no galactic dominion. There was only the predator and the prey. The most obvious and most terrible of the new masters were the Necrons. Theirs was not a victory of passion, but of inevitability. From their 10,000 tomb worlds, the dynasties had risen as one, their cold, flawless logic, a scalpel in a galaxy of diseased flesh. Their silver ships, the great Cairn-class tomb ships and Scythe-class harvest ships, moved with a silent, contemptuous grace. They did not use the immaterium. They had no need for that messy, chaotic dimension of the lesser races. They employed their inertialess drives, folding space and time, appearing in a system without warning and vanishing just as quickly. They were ghosts of cold metal, untouchable and absolute. On the human fortress world of Praxis, the warlord governor had held out for 2 decades against orc assaults and chaos raids. He saw the Necron fleet appear on his long-range augers, and mistaking them for another human faction, broadcast a belligerent warning. He received no reply. The Necron fleet did not deploy troops. It did not offer terms. It simply moved into a precise geometric formation above the planet. Then, from the belly of the lead tomb ship, a beam of pure black energy, a pinprick of anti-creation lanced down. It did not strike the fortresses. It struck the planet's molten core. The governor had 10 seconds to comprehend his error as his world's magnetic field collapsed. The planet's atmosphere was stripped away by its own star. The oceans boiled into space. The fortresses cracked open, their occupants flash-frozen and suffocated in a hard vacuum. The Necrons watched their green-lensed eyes impassive. This was not war. It was pest control. The Sautek dynasty, led by Imhotep, the Stormlord, began a systematic, great cleansing of the galactic East. They were not fighting for territory. They were fighting to restore territory. To them, all life was a biological weed that had grown up in their garden while they slept. Now they were simply methodically and tirelessly gardening. From the hellscape of the Eye of Terror, Abaddon the Despoiler had achieved his life's purpose. He stood on the ravaged, demon-haunted surface of what had once been Terra. The sky above him was a perpetual storm of violet and red. The golden throne, now a gateway to hell, pulsed with a rhythm of pure, chaotic power. He had won. He had killed the anathema. He had broken the Imperium. A demon prince of Khorne, its former mockery of a space marine, bounded up to him dripping gore from its brass-taloned hands. "My Lord Despoiler, we have done it. The galaxy is ours." Abaddon looked at the creature, and then at the howling, insane vortex that was the new reality. He looked at the star charts, which now showed vast, sterile zones of green, the mark of the Necron advance, and great consuming shadows of black, the Tyranid hive fleets. Ours. Abaddon's synthesized voice was flat devoid of triumph. Ours. He pointed with the talon of Horus to a cluster of stars that had simply winked out of existence last week. The silent ones, the metal ghosts, have claimed that. They are sterilizing the very stars. He pointed to the south. The great devourer. It eats that. It does not rule. It consumes. His victory was the most profound, bitter irony of all. He was the self-proclaimed master of a burning, collapsing house, a house whose other, more powerful inhabitants were now awake and hungry. He had spent 10,000 years fighting a lion only to succeed and find himself locked in a cage with a dozen hungrier, stronger lions that he had ignored. He was a king of ashes, his triumph rendered utterly meaningless by the very forces his victory had unleashed. And then there was the final true victor, the force that did not care for thrones or logic or history. In the vast, dark spaces between the dying petty kingdoms, the hive fleets moved. They were no longer scattered, probing tendrils. They were a single, unified, purposeful wave. With the Astronomican's noise gone, the hive mind's perception was perfect. It coordinated its fleets with flawless precision. Leviathan, Behemoth, and Kraken no longer struck randomly. They performed a galactic-scale pincer movement, a great coordinated harvest. Ultramar, the brightest light, was designated a primary feeding trough. The fleets did not try to conquer it. They simply ate it. One by one, the 500 worlds were encircled, blockaded by a wall of living bioships so thick it blotted out the stars. Then the spores fell. The planet's entire biosphere was rewritten in a matter of days. The sky filled with swarms, the land was overrun by gaunts, and the seas were boiled by gargantuan feeder organisms. Humanity in its isolated, warring fragments had no response. There was no imperial navy to coordinate a counterattack. There was no unified command. A warlord king might see the shadow of the hive fleet on his sensors, but he had no allies, no reserves. He would simply watch scream his defiance into the void and then be consumed. The Tyranids were not a new power. They were the galaxy's new baseline reality. They were the harvest. And the harvest, after 10,000 years of delay, was finally brutally and efficiently underway. In the new shattered galaxy, life in its arrogant human persistence tried to find a way. The Imperium was dead, but the need for travel, for trade, for connection was not. And so, in the shadows, new desperate projects were born. On the rogue station Eterna 9, a hollowed-out asteroid adrift in the debris fields of a forgotten battle, an unholy alliance had formed. A renegade Magos of the Mechanicus Kale Delta, who believed the failure of Mars was a failure of vision, worked with the surviving scions of Navigator House Tassilo. They had pooled their knowledge, their resources, and their morality. They were building a new lighthouse. The Terran model was flawed. Kale Delta's synthesized voice echoed in the vast, cold cavern. It was a single point of failure. It was brute force reliant on a dying biological deity. It was inefficient. He gestured to his creation. It was a grotesque, beautiful thing of brass wire and living, screaming flesh. The Eterna beacon is different. At its heart, bound in a stasis field of crackling Xenos green energy, was a captured Drukhari, a creature of pure negative psychic potential. Around this central writhing anchor, 1,000 human psychers culled from a dozen enslaved worlds were wired in their heads, encased in conductive helms. The corpse god pushed Kyle Delta explained to the Navigator Patriarch. He screamed, "We will create a void. A psychic vortex. The Drukhari anchor in its agony will create a cold spot, a point of absolute psychic zero in the Empyrean. The souls of the 1,000 will be the fuel, their life energy ripped into this vortex, creating a controlled, stable negative resonance. A dark star, a beacon of pure, cold absence. You will not navigate towards a light. You will navigate towards the whole." The Navigator Patriarch, his third eye milky and scarred, nodded. "Begin." Kyle Delta threw the great rune-etched lever. The machine roared. The 1,000 psychers did not burn. They imploded. Their bodies were flash-frozen, mummified in an instant, their souls ripped out and funneled into the screaming Drukhari. In the warp, a new thing was born, a pinprick of perfect, absolute cold, a silent, screaming hole in the fabric of the storm. On his navigation throne, the Patriarch gasped. I see it. It's beautiful. It's stable. It's clear. We can do it. We can build a network. We can reconnect the stars." He began to laugh, a dry, sobbing sound of desperate, triumphant hope. The hope lasted for 47 seconds. In the command sanctum, a console, one that monitored the background psychic resonance of the void, began to scream. Magos the Acolyte shrieked. The signal, it's not just a beacon, it's an attractor. The Navigator looked up from his charts, his laughter choking in his throat. He looked back into his third eye at his beautiful, cold, dark beacon. It was still there, but it was no longer alone. What is that?" he whispered. The darkness of the beacon, the pure nothingness he had created, was a curiosity in the roiling chaos. And it had drawn the curious. A presence, a vast, shifting, intelligent thing of pure, crystalline change, had noticed the impossible little hole in its realm. Tzeentch, the architect of fate, had found a new, interesting toy. Simultaneously, a presence of a different kind noticed. In the cold, real space void, a shadow passed over the asteroid station. It was a Necron harvest ship, its sensors having detected a sudden, anomalous, and highly irregular energy signature that defied all known laws of physics. It was an equation that did not balance. The beacon was a success. It was so successful, in fact, that it had shone a spotlight on itself for the two greatest and most terrifyingly intelligent forces in the galaxy. One was drawn by the sheer magical arrogance of the act. The other was drawn by its offensive illogic. "They see us!" the Navigator whispered as blue-pink fire began to lick at the edges of his third eye's vision, the laughter of demons echoing in his mind. "Hostile fleet, real space." The Acolyte confirmed, his voice trembling, as the station's hull began to dissolve, not from cannon fire, but from a beam of pure green molecular disassembly. Kyle Delta looked at his readouts. He looked at the impossible energy readings from the Immaterium and the cold, perfect approach of the Necron ship. His project, his great hope for a new human network, had failed. It had not just failed, it had served as a come-and-get-us sign for the true masters of the galaxy. Conclusion, the Magos droned as the walls of his sanctum turned to green glowing dust. All attempts to rebuild only served to focus the attention of the inevitable. All light, all darkness, all signals are just food for the gods or the machines. The Eterna 9 station and the foolish, desperate hope it represented was erased from existence, caught in the crossfire of a god's curiosity and a machine's logic. On the world that had once been the bustling, productive hive world of Thracian primus humanity had entered its final pathetic twilight. The great spire's marvels of ancient engineering that had once pierced the clouds were now just mountains. Rusted, hollow, artificial mountains, their peaks shrouded in a permanent toxic fog. Deep inside the great Rust Mountain, formerly Hive Secundus, the Eye-Biter tribe, huddled in what had once been a transit junction. Their leader Gruul, a man whose ancestors had been master voidship welders, was testing his spear. It was a length of rusted rebar, its tip sharpened on the broken marble face of a forgotten imperial saint. Technology had not just failed, it was gone. The knowledge to maintain repair, or even understand it, had died with the last starved generations. The auto-fabricators were silent. The nutrient vats were dry. The air recyclers had choked to death on their own filters a century ago. The light came from fires lit with the burning, plastic-wrapped data slates of a forgotten age. A cry went up. Some Peters at the high pass. Gruul grabbed his most powerful weapon, the God Stick. It was a Cadian pattern laser gun, its power cell fused into the stock, its casing cracked. It held, according to the tribe's shaman, one shot. It had held one shot for 30 years. No one dared test it. It was a relic, a symbol of a magic that was no longer in the world. Gruul hefted it, using it as a club, and led his warriors armed with pipe knives and rebar spears into the echoing darkness. They were not fighting for faith or honor or territory. They were fighting for a crate of dried, chemically tainted fungus. Humanity on a million worlds had not just fallen. It had regressed. It was back to the cave, only this time the cave was made of plasteel, and the dark was infinitely more crowded. That night, after the skirmish, a young girl named Palla huddled by the greasy chemical fire. An old woman, her eyes milky with cataracts and malnutrition, was telling a story. It was the old story. Long back, the woman rasped, her voice dry as dust. Long, long back, the sky. It was not empty. It was full of ships, and they was all one tribe, the Big Man tribe. The Emperor Palla whispered the word. It was a holy word, a curse word. The old woman spat into the fire. Maybe he was the sky god. They say he lived on a world of just light, a world called Terra, and he was a big light. He kept the dark from coming. What happened? Pessa asked, though she knew the answer. The old woman's face crumpled, a rare moment of ancient inherited grief. He left. Or he died. The light went out. The sky broke. And the sky gods, they abandoned us. They left us for the metal ghosts, Necrons, who walk in the dark. They left us for the rain that eats tyrannids. They left us for the screamers, demons. She poked the fire. The burning data slate, its text, long since illegible, flared with green and purple light. There are no more sky gods, child. There is no Emperor. There is no Terra. That is just a sleep story. There is only the tribe. There is only the Rust Mountain. And the dark. Far, far from the Rust Mountain, in the cold, silent void between the dead stars, a single object tumbled end over end. It was an Astartes helmet, its blue paint chipped and scarred, the proud omega of the Ultramarines, barely visible beneath a layer of vacuum ice. It was a relic of a dead age, a forgotten promise of protection. It spun slowly, tumbling through the darkness. The single intact ruby-red eye lens caught the distant starlight. It passed across the great, gaping, chaotic wound of the expanded cicatrix maledictum. It passed over the new, rigid, green glowing lines of the Necron's restored celestial network, a web of cold logic enclosing the galaxy. It reflected a great consuming shadow, a darkness deeper than the void itself, as a tendril of a tyrannid hive fleet passed, blotting out 1 billion stars. The helmet reflected a galaxy that was no longer dark and empty. It was full. It was inhabited. It was just no longer human. It tumbled on a final silent piece of scrap, ignored by the great predators that now owned the night. In the new galaxy, there was no light. There was no hope. There was only the vast cold and final silence of a failed species, and the roars and clicks and laughter of those who had come to inherit the ruins. Let us at last look upon the truth. We must silence the final dying echo of hope. The failure of the Astronomican was not a tragedy. It was not a sudden, unforeseen catastrophe. It was simply a pronouncement. It was the physician's hand finally, after 10,000 years of false hope, pulling the sheet over a face that had died millennia ago. The Imperium of Man was not murdered by the darkness. The Imperium of Man was a corpse. It was a walking, shambling galvanic cadaver, animated not by life, but by the sheer screaming psychic force of a single dying god's agony. It was a civilization that had hollowed itself out, sacrificing its future, its knowledge, its compassion, and its very children, all to keep a single failing heart monitor beeping for one more day. Its engine was not industry. It was the industrial-scale slaughter of its own psyches. Its faith was not a belief in a future. It was a paranoid, terrified worship of a rotting past. Its armies were not a shield for its people. They were a blunt instrument of self-consumption, a vast grinding machine that turned human beings into Lars rounds and corpse starch. The Imperium had died at the very moment the Emperor was interred upon the Golden Throne. It died when truth was replaced with faith and reason was replaced with heresy. What we have witnessed, this grand galactic collapse, was not a fall. It was a settling. It was the simple, logical, and final act of a rotted-out structure finally collapsing under its own impossible weight. The Astronomican's silence was not the cause of this. It was the symptom. It was the last sputtering electrical impulse from a brain that had been dead for 10,000 years. And its cessation, its final, beautiful silence, was simply the universe's confirmation of the death certificate. The true catastrophe, the one that few mortals would ever understand, was not military. It was not logistical. It was spiritual. It was metaphysical. For 10 millennia, the Emperor, in his silent, screaming agony, had done more than just light a path. His very existence, his psychic presence, was a great defiant roar of order. He was the anathema. He was a great psychic dam holding back the infinite, formless, howling ocean of the immaterium. His will and his alone maintained the fragile, arrogant concept of reality. He imposed the law of physics of cause and effect of truth upon a galaxy that was intrinsically, fundamentally insane. When he died, the dam did not just crack, it was annihilated. The ocean of chaos, the primordial truth, did not just flood in, it returned. It reasserted its true and natural dominion. Chaos is no longer an invader. It is the new fundamental law. The barrier between the materium and the immaterium is gone. On a million worlds, the laws of physics are now negotiable. A man's hatred can and does curdle the milk in his neighbor's kitchen. A city's collective despair can and does cause the sun to go out, replaced by a swirling vortex of weeping, leering faces. Gravity is now subject to the whims of the nearest demonic prince. Time itself runs backwards or sideways or in agonizing, repeating loops of terror. The very concept of invading demons is a falsehood. The demons are not in the galaxy. The galaxy is the demons. Terror, the very heart of that defiant logical order, is now the ultimate proof, a perpetual fountain of madness, a gateway that will never close. The long war is over. The great game has been won. The Chaos Gods are not just victorious, they are everything. They are the air, the ground, the very thoughts of the surviving, screaming fragments of humanity. They have not just conquered the house, they have become the house and all the termites within it. And so this new galaxy, this age of the true dark, is not for humanity. It never was. Mankind was an accident. A brief, arrogant shouting anomaly that so briefly held a candle in an infinite, hungry hurricane. The future does not belong to the petty, warring cannibal kings of the broken human statelets. The future belongs to the true powers. It belongs to the Necron dynasties, the ancient silent masters who are now rising their cold, green, logical eyes, surveying the mess of their interrupted slumber. They see humanity as a biological mold, a fungal infestation that has grown in their great galactic halls. They are now beginning the Great Cleansing, a systematic, pitiless and efficient extermination, scouring the stars with their cold, physical fire, restoring the cold, perfect, silent galaxy that is their birthright. It belongs to the Tyranid hive mind, the great devourer, a force of pure biological imperative. In the sudden perfect silence, it has finally seen the feast laid out on 1,000,000 undefended screaming tables. It is not a conqueror, it is a harvester. It descends upon the broken, terrified remnants of life, a unified, perfect, and inescapable wave of consumption. It is the galaxy's ultimate biological solution to the problem of life itself, and it belongs finally and completely to the gods of chaos who have inherited the souls of all. They feast on the terror of those running from the Necrons. They glut themselves on the despair of the worlds being eaten by the Tyranids. They laugh at the small, defiant acts of the last human warlords, and they whisper in the ears of the last desperate survivors, offering a hope that is just another sharper flavor of damnation. For 40,000 years, humanity has huddled around its dying fire, looking up to the distant, agonizing light of terror, praying for salvation from a god who could not hear. Now they look up from the ruins of their hive cities, from the mud of their forgotten trenches, from the decks of their becalmed, lost ships. They look up, and they see nothing. No light, no guide, no hope. And in that final, perfect, absolute silence, for the very first time in their short, failed history, they can at last hear with perfect, terrible clarity the laughter of the thirsting gods.